Hello, fourth form. You will remember last lesson we started talking about some of the glacial features that you get from erosions, some of the glacial landforms that form up our glacial landscape. And we talked through the Glacial Trough, which you will remember is that large U-shaped valley that's formed by freeze-thaw weathering, plucking and abrasion. And we then talked through the Hanging Valley again, which is a smaller U-shaped valley off the larger one, which is made by smaller tributary glaciers carrying out the same processes that lead to our big glacial trough or U-shaped valley. So the processes of freeze-thaw weathering and then from the glacier erosion through abrasion and plucking. And you'll also remember right at the end of the lesson we talked about ribbon lakes, which are formed again by the processes of abrasion and plucking, sort of wearing away the rock. But also we need two different types of rock. So you'll see down at the bottom left-hand corner of the image here, we have the soft rock and the hard rock. And the soft rock obviously erodes faster and creates a depression in the bottom of our valley, which then when the glacier melts is filled up with meltwater, and you might possibly get some deposition, as you can see on the right-hand side of that little image down in the bottom left, the right-hand side, where the moraine is deposited, which builds up a lip of material for our ribbon lake. And we also talked through truncated spurs, so you'll remember that as the big glacier cuts through our valley, it cuts off the end of the interlocking spurs that we would have had from our river system and creates this series of truncated spurs. And you'll also remember that we said the truncated spurs would usually sort of coincide perhaps with some hanging valleys as well. So typically you usually get hanging valleys and truncated spurs kind of together in sets. So this lesson, we're going to look at the rest of the erosional features for glaciers, and we're then going to move on to looking at depositional features or landforms for glaciers. So throughout all this video, feel free to pause the video to go back and look at the different elements again and revisit them. And as you go through, if you can, make notes or draw diagrams for each of the landforms that we've got here, so that you can remember how they are formed. So corries are very important. They are really the start of glaciers, and they're kind of chair-shaped depressions that form in our landscape. And what first happens is you get depressions forming in high mountain peaks where snow accumulates and it doesn't melt in the winter. And what that does is it starts building up glacial ice, and a process called novation is going to take place that gradually makes that hollow a little bit bigger. So you get things like freeze-thaw weathering taking place and breaking down some of the rock, and also some of the ice processes as the ice starts to move will then start to have more of an effect. And as the glacier grows, the weight that is added to the top of the ice, so as more snow builds up on top of that ice, it adds weight to it, and that is going to cause more weight to occur at the back, because as you can see, because of the hill slope and where the depression is, you're going to get a larger mass at the back wall. And that causes our glacial ice to rotate and slip around the glacier, which you can see down in the bottom right of our picture. We can see the glacial ice is kind of slipping around or rotating around the corrie, which is called rotational slip. And underneath the glacial ice, the pressure causes some of that rock to melt, which helps the sliding. But any rock that has been caught up from freeze-thaw weathering in that glacier is going to be ground around that corrie and make it deeper through the process of abrasion. And also some pieces where there is some water, so that water will refreeze, and there will also be some plucking which will rip out pieces of that rock, and particularly usually at the back wall. then we have plucking occurring. So what's happening is you've got plucking ripping out rock at the back wall, and then that rock is being used to abrade and make this hollow deeper and deeper. And this process has caused what we call an over-deepened hollow, or the basin, which is a corrie. Now you'll also see in the bottom right of that picture, we've got a bit of a lip forming. And what happens here is that the pressure causes some of the water to melt, some of the ice, to melt, which means there is a sort of little area of deposition towards the sort of downward side of the corrie. And that little area of deposition builds up a little kind of wall of moraine or till that's left behind, which can trap water that is melt water in the corrie and form a lake that we can see here down in the bottom left, which is a tarn. And all of those processes work together to form our corrie. So there are a set of questions. You can see they're repeated on the left and the right. So if you can, try to answer those questions. And indeed, if you want to pause the video while you answer them, and we will then be looking at our next feature. So the final feature we're going to look at for erosional landforms are aretes and pyramidal peaks. And you can see that in this picture, we have one arete on the left-hand side here, and we have another arete on the right-hand side of this photo here, and there would probably be another one down the back, down there. And that has formed this pointed shape or peak at the top of the mountain, and that is a pyramidal peak. So what you've got is you've got three or more corries that are backed off against each other to form the pyramidal peak. And then you can also see in this photo, there is a long, thin sort of ridge running down there where two corries are backed off against each other, and we call that long, thin ridge an arete. Now, what's going to happen is you're going to get the same processes causing the corries to form, as we've just looked at. And the corries will gradually eat back into that back wall on either side, and will gradually make that steeper and steeper. And so you get this like knife edge of a ridge called an arete that's there. And gradually that is also going to be broken down by freeze-thaw weathering. So sometimes you might get some cracks or breaks in the ridge, and you might also see material gathered down the side of the ridge called a scree slope. And likewise, the pyramidal peak at the top, you're also going to get freeze-thaw weathering taking place, which is going to sort of give it that kind of jagged, broken look to the peak in some places. But the main process that's taking place here are the processes of erosion that have formed the corrie in the first place. So again, if you can answer the questions, you'll see that there are the same questions on the left and the right, and we will then move on to looking at depositional landforms. And likewise, as I said before, if you wish to pause the video, do just pause the video and have a look at these questions. So we'll now start looking at our depositional landforms. And we can see a number in this lovely photo that we've got of the mountains here. And one of those are these features that you can see running down the middle of this glacial ice. So see, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes, see if you can identify what you think that feature is made of and how you think it got there. So those features are moraines, and we can get different moraines depending on the ice. Now, moraines are essentially unsorted pieces of sediment. They can consist of very large boulders, right down to tiny, very fine particles like flour, which we call rock flour. These sediments, they're going to be mixed together, all sort of randomly mixed up. The large material usually is as a result of freeze-thaw weathering and plucking. And the finer material, or even rock flour, comes from abrasion. The largest moraine piles usually build up in front of the ice, You might remember the process of bulldozing from a few lessons ago, and as the ice advances, it pushes all of that debris in front of it. And indeed, when the glacier melts, it leaves large amounts of material at its snout, and they extend for large areas across the valley. We sometimes get piles of material accumulating down the side or the middle of the glacier, as we can see in this image here. And then when the glacier melts, that material is just left where it was standing. And there are 5 types of moraine, and they are determined by their position relative to the glacier. So we have lateral moraines, which are ones that run down the side of the glacier. We have medial moraines, which are ones that run down the middle of the glacier. We have ground moraines, which are stored under the glacial ice or at the base of the glacier. There are terminal moraines, which are right at the snout of the glacier, or at the terminal of the glacier. And we have recessional moraines, which are where the snout used to be before the glacier retreated back up the mountain. And we can see there's a description of each of them: lateral, terminal, ground, recessional, and medial moraine. So, if you'd just like to pause the video and make a quick note of each type of moraine and their description. Another common feature that we get from deposition in glacial areas are features that look like this: large bits of rock that don't fit in with the surrounding geology. And we call them erratics. So an erratic are huge boulders of rock that have been transported very long distances. So they typically have been moved from the upper course or the upper valley down into other areas in the lower valley, or indeed in some cases hundreds of miles. And they are completely different to the geology of the surrounding area, so they don't fit in with the surrounding area. Some erratics are very, very huge. So for example, Indian Rock just outside New York weighs about 15,700 tons, and it's estimated it was transported about 30 kilometers by the glacial ice. And what happens is these large boulders are picked up by the ice and carried down the mountain, and then either the ice melts or it reaches the end of the glacier, and they are then just deposited on the hillside. And when the ice melts and disappears, this rock is just left on the surrounding countryside and doesn't fit in with the rest of the geology. And the final feature, depositional feature that we're going to look at, are things called drumlins, which are these kind of half egg-shaped hills or upside down, or half an avocado-shaped hills that we see left in glacial landscapes. And they look a little bit like this, and you can see that they've got one side that is a lot steeper and one side that is a lot more gentle in terms of slope. And they are made of large piles of moraine that have been deposited over an obstacle on the valley floor. And they are then shaped by the ice advance to give them this steep-sided side and this more gentle sloping side. And the steep-sided side we call the stoss end, and the more gentle sloping side we call the lee slope. And typically, as you can see from this cross-section, they are going to be about somewhere between 2 and 100 meters high. And we can see again from the aerial view, the lower image, that they would typically be around 10 to either 1,000 meters long. And you can see that the ice flow is moving in this picture from left to right. And what we would get is the steeper side on the left-hand side and the more gentle slope on the right-hand side, which is the opposite of what we would see with a roche moutonné. And here is a summary of the stages that cause a drumlin to form. But they are all jumbled up and in the wrong order. So what I would like you to do is to try and put puts them in the correct order. And I will give you some time to do that. So again, please pause the video and have a go at that. So hopefully you have now managed to get them in the right order. So just to go through, here is the correct order. So a glacier would pass over an obstacle on the valley floor, something like a patch of harder rock or a large boulder. The ice would then melt around that obstacle and deposit a blanket of material or moraine over the obstacle. Later, the ice re-advances over the area and pushes that material over and around the obstacle, covering it, and smooth it out. And this up and over and around movement drags the moraine in the direction of the glacier's flow, spreading it out. And when the ice melts, the drumlin is then revealed as this half-boiled egg shape or half avocado shape. And often, many are together, creating a landscape known as a basket of eggs. And the result is a moraine pile that is elongated and tapered, and it has a steep end, the stoss end, and a long, gentle lee slope that points in the direction of the ice movement as it has been smoothed by the glacial ice advancing. And indeed, there is a picture of a basket of eggs in Cumbria in the United Kingdom. And you can see when we go to the false colour image, the different drumlins stand out a little bit more. And what you might potentially get in an exam is a question like this, where you're given a photograph like this one and you're then asked to label and sketch the key characteristics of the drumlin. Now obviously you would want to have the stoss end and the lee slope, showing the different levels of height and possibly the obstacle in the middle for 3 marks for that one. So they might give you an image like this, so you need to identify the key characteristics, and there is the figure 13. So you would start off by sketching out the basic shape of it, something like that. My art is not fantastic. And you would then label the stoss end, you'd label the gentle lee slope, and you might give an estimate of the height using things that are in the picture. So in this case there were trees, and those would be enough for your 3 key features to gain the 3 marks there. And another question you might get is potentially a 6 marker on this. So explain the formation of a drumlin for 6 marks. Now remember, anything in the exam that's 4 marks or over is going to be levelled marked. And there is a copy of the mark scheme, so you can see what is expected to gain 5 or 6 marks there. So for this one, you would need to show all of the different stages and perhaps show the connections between each stage using consistent terminology, so things like stoss end and lee slope. And perhaps you might even want to link it to examples such as the basket of eggs in Cumbria. And just as a final little task, if you would like to try and draw a diagram like this one and label the different types of moraine and the snout of the glacier. And I will see you guys next lesson when I am back from the field trip. Thank you very much.